Hey, what's up, Finn Treasure Hunters? Welcome back to another episode of Treasures Galore. My name is Michael Elder, and in this channel I talk about everything Forrest Finn, but most importantly, I go over the memoirs. Now, a few things before I get into this video is I can't make everyone happy, so in this video I'm going to be talking about where warm waters halt and where I believe that they halt. Now, I'm not saying that this is right and everyone's wrong. I'm just simply going through the books, finding hints or clues that'll lead me back to the poem, which in turn will lead you to the treasure chest. Now, I've searched, I've used this, and I've went and looked. I didn't find anything, but to me, this is the most logical where warm waters halt. And I'm going to break this series, I guess, of where warm waters halt into three parts. So me and Carter with the House Husband Diaries, if you haven't subscribed to him, do it because Tuesday we're going to do a live show on this exact topic where warm waters halt. Now, I talked to him and I told him that I really wanted to get out where I believe where warm waters halt is before this video because it's going to take too long to, go over all my different things that I've seen in the books and scrapbooks. And so he agreed that I could do this. So we're still going to talk about where warm waters halt in the live video. We're going to be going over quotes and books and you know everything that would point us in the right direction and talk about everything where warm waters halt. So this video is just about my opinion on where I believe that where warm waters halt is. And so, like I said, I'm going to break it up into three sections because, I've had a lot of people criticize me over my last video because it was 40 minutes long. Now, I don't think it really matters because if I break it out into three videos or one video, at the end, it's still going to be the exact same amount of time. But I'm going to break it out. So, anyways, without further ado, let's get into this thing. Where do warm waters halt? So, this has been on my mind since I first got the book. And the first time I read it, this is what popped up in my head. And it's the most simple where warm waters halt if you're just reading the book without using any outside knowledge or any, opinion of yours. If you're just strictly reading the book, this is one with imagination. I'll have to say that too. If you're reading the book with imagination, this is probably the one that should stick out in your brain and make you think, well, maybe this is it. Now, I know Forrest Fenn, said the book's not going to lead you to the treasure, and so it's not. But in my opinion, this is how he hints at where warm waters halt. It's kind of subtle, and it's not used too much. Now, there has been a lot of searchers that have used this. Not a lot, but I will say that I've read it, probably a handful of times on the blogs, and, maybe you guys have heard it more than I have. But, like I said, it's the most logical one, in my opinion. So, I'm going to bring you guys to the Totem Cafe Caper. I think this is one of the most important chapters in the book. So, R.F. Hecky brought this up, and people agree with this and disagree with this, but on the picture, on the left-hand side of the page of the cabin, if you look up at that picture, you will see a shadow right on the left-hand side, about middle up the picture, like middle of cabin. If you look at that, it really looks like Albert Einstein in half of his face. Go look up a picture, one of the famous pictures of him, and it really does look like Albert Einstein. So, whether you agree with that or disagree with that, I think he's telling us to use your imagination in this chapter. So, I'm going to read from the chapter. One summer, I found myself selling newspapers on the streets of West Yellowstone, Montana. The Montana Standard and the Billings Gazette. That was many years before the streets were paved, so the deep potholes on Canyon Street were often filled with water that was fair game for every car that bounced by. I think they competed to see which one could splash dirty water on the most people. I used to hide behind a tree and laugh. Okay, so many years before the streets were paved, remember that for my next video. So the deep potholes, multiple, not one, multiple potholes on Canyon Street were often filled with water that was fair game for every car that bounced by. I think they competed to see which one could splash dirty water on the most people. I used to hide behind a tree and laugh. So you got these potholes. It's in the summertime, okay? That's important. Summertime. And he's on this road, which happens to be called Canyon Street. So there's multiple potholes filled with water, so multiple bodies of water on Canyon Street in the summertime. When the cars bounce by, it would splash the water. So the water would be in these potholes, and the water halted, and it's warm because it's in the summertime, and the cars drove by and splashed water on the people. And he says, dirty water. And he also says, I used to hide behind a tree and laugh. Okay, we all know that Forrest Fenn laughed on his way back to his car when he hid the treasure chest and said, Forrest Fenn, did you really do that? I used to hide behind a tree. Now, I know I've said this a lot, but I really do think the blaze is a tree, a marking on a tree, and it's right under that. He hid behind a tree and laughed. What if he hid the treasure chest behind a tree and then laughed on his way back to his car? So again, multiple bodies of water in the summer, which would be warm, the potholes, and then on Canyon Street. And they would halt and the water would splash on the people, the dirty water. So when I first read this is the first thing that came up in my head, is that this couldn't be where warm water's halt, could it? So I went and looked up kettles because I thought it was, well, let me bring that up. Potholes. And potholes and kettles are synonymous. Now, since I kind of gave the beans away on that, let me go to the next page and read from there. So it says, anyways, it meant getting up at 4:45 a.m. to be on the job at 5 a.m. And 16 hours later, my shift ended, and I was $8 richer. Each dish and pan had to be washed by hand, dipped in scalding water, and dried. Whew! My hands turned white and had deep canyons in them. What I really hated to wash were the giant kettles used for making brown gravy. The smell truly assaulted my sensitivities, and that's why I don't eat brown gravy anymore. So, really interesting things. There was scalding water. It made his hands they turned white and had deep canyons in them. And then he mentions kettles, and the smell was terrible, okay? So, again, he's mentioning water, he's mentioning canyons, and kettles. Well, pothole and kettle are pretty close to the same thing. Now, I know they're different, but pretty close to the same thing. They can be used as a synonym almost. And the smell truly assaulted my sensitivities. Okay? Now, let me go back to the previous page, and this is the point I was going to bring up before that, and why I think this chapter is really important. So right after he says, I used to hide behind a tree and laugh, he says, anyways, I made a penny for every paper I sold, and it soon added up pretty good. But the sack my 80-pound body had to carry was so heavy, it was tiring even to think about. So, let's start off with the first sentence. Anyways, I made a penny for every paper I sold, and it soon added up pretty good. Now, I firmly believe that when he's stating this, he's talking about hiding the treasure chest. And this first sentence is about him selling art, and it soon added up to be a pretty penny. But the sack my 80-pound body had to carry was so heavy, It was tiring even to think about. So there's a sack that he's carrying and his 80-pound body. Now he was 79 or 80 when he had the treasure chest. So he's carrying a sack with his 80-pound body. I think that's really interesting. He uses that number. But it was so heavy. He says the treasure was so heavy it was almost, too much for one person to carry. It was tiring even to think about. I've done it tired, and now I'm weak. Firmly believe that he's talking about hiding the treasure chest and him having his art gallery and selling stuff and making a pretty penny to where he could be able to do that. Now later it says, one morning I sat down to rest on the curb in front of Skaggs grocery store when my boss just happened to drive by in his big, beautiful, yellow Cadillac. Interesting. He uses the words yellow and beautiful. Yellowstone, the Canyon Street is in Yellowstone. So I'm going to bring up another point, and sorry if I'm jumping back and forth and confusing you. Hopefully I'm not doing that. But I wanted to bring up the scalding water, and the smell was terrible. Like he mentioned in the Totem Cafe caper. Giant kettles used for making brown gravy with scalding water, and the smell was terrible. So when I read that, I thought to myself, didn't I just read something like that? Which I did in Surviving Myself. He says, we experimented dipping the dead thing in scalding water first. So again, scalding water. And that helped a little, but the smell was terrible. So again, he's talking about scalding water, and the smell was terrible. Okay, that's really interesting because there's another mention of this in Too Far to Walk. He says in the preface, one was about helping my parents make soap over an open fire in our backyard in the 1930s. I remember the horrible smell when my father poured homemade lye into a large black kettle of boiling pig fat. So I'll read it again. Horrible smell when my father poured homemade lye into a large black kettle of boiling pig fat. So again, there's the horrible smell and the scalding water with kettles. 3 mentions of boiling or scalding water, kettles, and the smell was terrible. So let me bring up one more thing in Once Upon a While. So in supplemental punishment, he says, after the customary whipping, believing I could benefit from supplemental punishment, I was assigned the lone chore of doing the dreaded supper dishes. There were 5 in our family, so when you threw in the smelly gravy pan, rolling pin, and potato masher, the task was taunting. So, mentioning again, the smelly gravy pan. But what's really interesting about this chapter is that this chapter was originally a scrapbook. And let me read from the scrapbook. There were 5 in our family plus a dog. So when you threw in a skillet, rolling pin, cleaver, and potato masher, the dishwashing and drying task became monumental. He didn't use the smelly gravy pan in the scrapbook. He threw that in the book. He threw smelly gravy pan in the book. Now, why would he do that if it's not important? That's just a little thing. Who would care what kind of dishes he washed? That's not part of the story. It doesn't have anything to do with the story. So we threw in the smelly gravy pan. Okay, so let me bring up another one. And this also made me think about the Totem Cafe caper, and it is scrapbook 203. So he's talking about a book signing. So let me read. The book signing took place near the top of Lower Canyon Road at Argos Etching and Paintings. There on the left, next to Ed Larson's gallery, whose large sign reads, Jesus says by folk art. All this fits Eli exactly. I thought as I splashed up the steps into a small but pleasant gallery space. It was crowded with people I didn't know. Okay, so if you didn't catch that, he's again talking about a canyon road or canyon street. Now, this one is in Santa Fe, and this exact canyon road was also brought up in The Thrill of the Chase, which is really interesting. So, three mentions of the canyon road. There might be more, but two mentions of roads named Canyon in The Thrill of the Chase, one in Santa Fe and one in West Yellowstone. But what I really thought was interesting, because this is kind of a different way to word this. So he's talking about Canyon Road, and then he says, I thought as I splashed up the steps. Splashed up the steps? That sounds interesting. Kind of sounds like in the Totem Cafe caper when he's on Canyon Street and the cars would splash dirty water on people. Interesting. So this is why I believe that where Warm Waters halt is Canyon Road, or Canyon Street. Well, what I meant was Canyon Street in West Yellowstone with the potholes, many potholes, summertime, warm. But let me bring up my biggest point. Now, I keep talking about kettles, and kettles and potholes are kind of synonymous with scalding water that smells bad. Now, when Forrest Fenn was asked about where warm waters halt, he says, there are many places where warm waters halt, and nearly all of them are north of Santa Fe. Look at the big picture. There are no shortcuts. So, if you're looking at the big picture, what would be a big where warm waters halt? Well, could it be the boundary or the border of Yellowstone also? So right by Canyon Street, there's a called Boundary Street right next to it, and that is the boundary of Yellowstone Park. So, if you do, it's a simple Google search. It's not specialized knowledge, but if you look up Yellowstone, it's the biggest caldera in the world. Okay? Caldera in Spanish is kettle. It's the biggest kettle of water in the world. Caldera means kettle in Spanish, okay? And what is Yellowstone known for? It's known for its scalding water that smells terrible. It smells like sulfur. So he's talking about kettles with scalding water that smells bad, 4 different instances, and then there's a whole bunch of different things I'm going to bring up in my next videos. And so, kettles, scalding water, smelling bad, that's exactly what Yellowstone is. Caldera means kettle, it's known for its scalding water, and it smells terrible. So when I found that out, I was like, this surely has to be it, right? It surely has to be it. You got your canyon, you got your multiple waters, they're warm, and you also have Boundary Street right next to Canyon Street. Then you got the scalding water with kettles that smells bad, which in my mind resembles Yellowstone, the Yellowstone Park, the border of Yellowstone Park that's right by Canyon Street. Now, I would include maybe he's using this as an example, and maybe where Warm Waters halt is a different entrance to Yellowstone Park or by the border of where the park ends. Very well could be. I'm not going to discount that at all. But to me, going through the books, this makes plenty of sense where Warm Waters halt. It's the big picture. Now, I know I'm going to talk about this in my live video with Carter, but I wanted to bring up a few quotes. It says, so I'll read this one. Dear Emily, searchers continue to figure their first two clues, and others arrive there and don't understand its significance of where they are. The next quote I want to bring up. That's how I know a few have identified the first two clues. Although others were at the starting point, I don't I think that their arrival was an aberration and they were oblivious to its connection with the poem. So, searchers are showing up to the first two clues and they have no idea. Now, to me, this is the biggest thing about Where One Waters Halt, right? How are searchers showing up to the first clue and not knowing it? Okay, so searchers are showing up to the Madison Junction. They believe that that's where One Waters Halt. How many searchers are going to the Madison Junction and thinking this, I'm oblivious to its connection, I don't know it? Well, of course they're not. Or what about a hot springs or a famous hot springs or, something like that? How would people show up there, searchers, and don't understand it? To me, that means that Where Warm Waters Halt is a very common place where searchers go, but it's not necessarily a common exact spot that they think, like hot springs or something like that. So I'm gonna bring this up in another video too, but people could go to West Yellowstone, very common place for searchers to look, right? There's a lot of people that go to West Yellowstone. But a lot of them would have no idea that the Canyon Street was where Warm Waters Halt, or the potholes, and Canyon Street is the canyon down. There's a lot of people that showed up there, and there's some people that figured it out. Because, I mean, it's pretty straightforward that this could be possibly one of them if you're using your imagination. Kids have an advantage, he says, and he doesn't want to explain it. Maybe it's because if you give a kid a book and they read it, and then that's probably one thing that might stick out in their brain. But other people are using outside interpretations, fishing regulations, all this other stuff. They're overcomplicating it, and they're not just reading the book and going off what the book says. So it's very possible that this place could be it, in my opinion. Going through the books. Now, there's two other videos that I'm going to do to bring me back to this exact spot. And I'm going to save them for another video. This one's getting lengthy already. I didn't mean to talk this long. But, it's just interesting. Scalding water, kettles, the smell bad, potholes, Canyon Street. There's 4 or 5 instances of all those things, scattered through the books. He even added Smelly Gravy Pan in Once Upon a While, and it wasn't in, the scrapbook. So maybe I should talk about this right at the end. So he changes some things. So in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, 2008, so 2 years before the treasure chest was hidden, supposedly, or the chase started. So he changes some things. This is the same story about the Totem Cafe caper. And so he changes some things, which I thought was interesting. So he says, in the summer of 1942, when I was 12, I found myself selling newspapers, the Montana Standard and the Billings Gazette, on the streets of West Yellowstone. That was many years before any streets were paved, and the deep potholes on Canyon Street were often filled with water and fair game for every car that sped by. I think they competed to see which one could splash water the furthest. So he adds a few things. He puts dirty water in the thrill of the chase. Now, potholes and kettles are kind of synonymous, right? So I think it's interesting that he put the dirty water. Dirty is kind of a connotation, with smelly, which he didn't add in, this article that was in the newspaper. So dirty water, and he took out, I used to hide behind a tree and laugh, which I thought was interesting because I think that's important. So he says, anyways, the good news, I made a penny for every paper I sold. Although the bag my 80-pound body had to carry was so heavy, I struggled with every step. And so he added, or he left out, it was so heavy I struggled with every step. Well, in the book he says it was tiring to think about. It was so heavy, it was tiring to think about. So we added that in. And then he says, one morning my boss drove by and saw me sitting on the curb and he yelled, "Your can." Well, he left out the whole, you know, beautiful yellow Cadillac. And so, let me continue. So each dish and pan had to be, okay, excuse me. Each dish and pan had to be washed by hand, dipped in scalding water, and dried. Whew, my hands turned white and had deep canyons in them. So what did he leave out here? Well, he left out the giant kettles used for making brown gravy, and the smell was horrible. So we added the smelly kettle, or the smelly gravy kettle, and this, yeah, excuse me, left out the kettle, and the smell truly assaulted his sensitivities. So we added that in the book also. So it's just interesting that, this is only 2 years before this, and he had it written down. And then once the book is published, he adds these extra things in. Why? Why would he add in the smelly, the gravy kettle, the smell was bad. And also, like in the scrapbook, why would he add in with Once Upon a While? Why would he add in the smelly gravy pan? So I think those are some things you got to look at with, previous literature that he used and that is in the books, and what changed. What did he add? What did he take out? Why would he do that? This story wasn't. Now, the chase was in his mind. It's 2008. He's had the idea since 1988, and he's planned, probably had all the contents, knew exactly, had it marked out exactly where he was going to go, probably been to the spot to check it out. And, he had it all planned out, and this is 2008. So he wrote this, so the chase is still in his mind, it's 2008, but within the span of 2 years, he feels like he has to add a few things. Why? Why wouldn't you just leave it out if it wasn't important? You know what I mean? So I don't know how good that logic is, but it makes sense in my mind that, if there's differences between this and the book, then they should definitely be, considered as possible hints. So this is going to be the end of the first part of Where Warm Waters Halt. I got two more, and they point to the same exact spot. Same exact spot. So, anyways, guys, like I said, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but when I'm reading the books, I'm finding multiple things that are leading me to this area where, it could be possibly where warm waters halt. I think it should be considered. So, anyways, I hope you guys liked it. Stay tuned for video 2 and 3 coming up here shortly. So, anyways, guys, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to keep on putting content out left and right. And, share this if you think this is interesting. Share it with your friends, or let me know, what you guys think, if it could possibly be the right Where Warm Waters Halt. So let me know. Like and subscribe, and you can be entered into the drawing for my Indian pot. So I'm going to give it one more week, and then I'm going to pick out a winner and send it to you. So anyways, guys, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.